The term rationalism is usually used to refer to the thesis that there are important truths that are discoverable without the aid of sense impression, through reason alone. The philosopher Leo Strauss, in his The Political Philosophy of Hobbes, uses the term rationalism in a somewhat different way. I will refer to Strauss's use of rationalism as political rationalism. Political rationalism is the thesis that the ground of both the authority of law and the sovereignty of the state rests in conformity with reason. Plato and Aristotle were both early advocates of this view. In his Republic, Plato presents us with an aristocratic three-tiered society governed by its most rational members, the philosopher kings, supported by military auxiliaries controlling the economic or productive classes of the society. This is in fact an allegory for Plato's tripartite psychology, in which the rational part of the soul, given its direct contact to the good, or steers and guides the passional and appetitive elements of the soul. In Aristotle, right, the natural ergon or function of a human being is to engage in reasoning. We are rational animals, and the purpose of the state is not simply to preserve or protect property, but to facilitate the full human flourishing of this potential for reason. We are political animals because that best facilitates our legacy as rational animals in Aristotle. Also, in Book 3 of his Politics, Aristotle observes that no state can be run well unless its rulers, whether it be one, a few, or the many, unless its rulers govern with an eye to the good of the state, requiring a rational grasp of the good, and have the know-how, phronesis, to facilitate and achieve and actualize those goods. The natural law tradition flows from these ideas. Cicero defines law as in the proper sense as right reason in harmony with nature. More than a millennium later, Aquinas echoes Cicero's words, defining law as an ordinance of reason for the common good made by him who has care for the community. Right? The authority of human law was thought to depend upon its conformity to this ideal or divine law. St. Augustine said, and he is approvingly quoted by Martin Luther King Jr., an unjust law is no law at all. Okay? So the authority of law, again, depends upon its conformity to this ideal. In the 17th century, the philosopher Thomas Hobbes rejected rationalism in both its epistemic and its political forms. Hobbes held that only fear and desire govern human motivation, and that reason is impotent in this regard. A full century before David Hume, Hobbes then endorsed what we could call an instrumental view of reason. Reason doesn't set our goals or motivate us. Reason is only calculation, figuring out how to efficiently and prudently realize goals set by the passions. This is a complete reversal of Plato's psychology. More than 2 centuries before Nietzsche, Hobbes also rejected the notion of the will as a faculty of the soul, defining will in terms of the last passion to win out in after a process of deliberation. Hobbes remarked that the notion of a rational will was like an oxymoron, a phrase without signification. Right. In The Elements of Law in 1647, Hobbes writes, "The common measure of all things that might fall in controversy, some say, is right reason, with whom I should assent, were there any such thing. But, seeing right reason is non-existent, the reason of some man or men must supply the place thereof, and that man or men is he or they that possess the sovereign power." Thus in Hobbes, as in much of later political philosophy after him, power replaces reason as the ground of political sovereignty, for the power can inspire fear, holding the natural avarice and violence of men in check. This theme persists through much of his most well-known work, The Leviathan. It is the fear of violent death that impels men to seek a covenant with one another, and it is the overawing power of the sovereign that keeps men obedient to the covenant that they have made. Yet, in chapter 30 of Leviathan, Hobbes seems to partially walk back this rejection of political rationalism. There he asserts it is against the sovereign's duty, quote, "to let the people be ignorant or misinformed as to the reasons of those his essential rights. The grounds of these rights," he continues in the next paragraph, quote, "need to be diligently and truly taught, because they cannot be maintained by any civil law or terror of legal punishment. While many may acquiesce out of terror alone, reason must still be supplied for some, lest they be seduced into rebellion." Hobbes then further anticipates two objections. First, to those who say power alone must suffice out of doubt that there are any rational grounds to sustain a sovereign's rights, Hobbes defends realism about principles of reason, quote, "to be found out by industrious meditation, to make constitutions accepting by external violence everlasting, and such are those which I have in this discourse set forth," unquote. Second, he heaps scorn upon the elitist objection that common people lack the capacity to understand such reasons. In tones suggesting lingering resentment over the English Civil War, he states, quote, "I would be glad that the rich and the potent subjects of a kingdom, or those that are accounted the most learned, were in no less incapable than they," that is, the common people. "But all men know that the obstructions to this kind of doctrine proceed not so much from the difficulty of the matter as from the interest of them that are to learn. Potent men digest hardly anything that setteth up a power to bridle their affections," unquote. But even where he concedes that some people, grasping the reasons why the sovereign should rule, will keep their covenants, he attributes their commitment not to reason itself, but to pride. And as for the greater part of humanity, Hobbes reiterates that the only dependable mechanism for ensuring obedience is fear.